got this little announcement that we make at the beginning of our meetings. Due to the shelter in place and COVID-19, the authority has chosen Zoom as its meeting platform. And during the meeting, please mute your mic. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and mute your mic now. And this is our second PAC meeting for Innovate 680. And I will request that any committee questions and comments on an agenda item, and if you would like to speak, you may physically raise your hand. As a co-host, you do not have the ability to raise your hand via the Zoom meeting platform. So you've got it. We'll watch for those actual hands being raised. And either Terry Ann or I will call upon you, and to speak, you may unmute your own mic. And after you speak, please mute your mic again. And I will request any public comment on each item. If any public who is attending the meeting wishes to speak during an agenda item, please raise your hand via the Zoom platform, which is down below. When you look up under participants, you can say raise your hand. Or if you're on the telephone and you wish to speak, you can hit *9. And Terry Ann or I will then call upon you to speak, and we will unmute your mic, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. And after 3 minutes, your mic will automatically be muted and your hand will be lowered. If an action is required on an agenda item, I will call the vote as chair, and then Terry Ann will then conduct a roll call vote. And when she calls upon you, please unmute your mic, vote, mute yourselves again. So if we could go ahead, I think we need to do, don't we need to do a roll call just to note who's present? Or Terry Ann, are you comfortable with the fact that you can see who is present?
We do have to do a roll call vote.
Okay.
I can make it really quick. Member Brown?
Here.
Member Haskew? I see her present.
Here.
Member Mitchoff? She's currently absent. Member Obringer? I saw her, I let her in. She's here, I let her in. Committee Member Perkins?
Here.
Member Ross? Ross is absent. Member Stepper?
Here.
Member Storer?
Here.
Vice Chair Nowak?
Here.
Chair Anderson is here. And I have Member Mitchoff coming in now. And we have member alternate on the line, Dave Hudson.
Terrific. Okay, and so we do in fact have a quorum. And our first agenda item tonight is our public comment. And this is the opportunity for anyone to speak on an item under the purview of this committee, but not on this evening's agenda. And so Terry Ann, I know that we did get one email public comment from Mr. Craig Bender, and I believe you're going to read this into the record. Do we have anyone else who is wishing to make a public comment? And this is the time where if you wish to speak on something not on tonight's agenda, you can raise your hand virtually, or I'm scanning, I'm not seeing anyone in real life, or if you're on the phone, *9 is, I believe, what will allow you to raise your virtual hand. Okay, so Terry, do you want to read that one public comment we did receive?
Candace, I'm sorry, I came on late. I just wanted to make sure Terry Ann had me on the roll. Thank you.
She did. She welcomed you in when she saw you in the waiting room. So delighted that you made it.
Thank you.
And then I also want to note that Member Perkins is also on the line.
Yes.
So I did know.
I responded to the roll call, I thought.
Oh, sorry. I thought I noted you as absent. So let me make sure. And then I do want to note that I do have a public comment letter from Craig Bender, and I did notice that he is on the line here, but I'm going to go ahead and read the letter that he submitted.
Well, or I'm fine having you submit that if Mr. Bender wishes to speak rather than have his letter read in, and then we could just put his letter in the record of actions too.
Let me see.
Well, and I will unmute Mr. Bender.
Okay, I am unmuted, I believe.
Yes, would you like to make your comment rather than have your letter read?
Sure. I appreciate your time. I'm probably a pain in the neck to you guys because I'm an engineer by training. I'm retired now and limited income. So I really watch how money is being spent. And in particular, I get upset every time I drive south from Walnut Creek and see this wall that went up between Red Gear and Livorna. And it looks like all that was done was to widen the highway by 5 feet. And I'm wondering, why couldn't they have widened it on the east side of the road where there's all that Sugarloaf open space? It would have been so much easier. You wouldn't have needed a big wall and so forth and so on. So the question I have is, are alternatives ever considered and discussed? And is there ever a cost to, benefit ratio that's done? I mean, according to the TEP, I guess, there should be performance-based project reviews that include an analysis of vehicle miles traveled, travel delay, greenhouse gas emissions, and so forth. I don't find any reviews on the website. Perhaps they're being done, perhaps not, but I certainly would be interested if they are. And, the other thing is, do you ever consider spending money outside of Contra Costa County? Because the money is to be spent for the benefit of Contra Costa County residents. And so many of them take the Bay Bridge, and I think there are things that could be done from 24 to the Bay Bridge that would benefit, maybe 100,000 Contra Costa residents a day. So that's another issue I have. But I look forward to the first agenda item where a presentation is to be made, and that supposedly is going to include the goals and associated metrics for evaluating the effectiveness of the program. So thank you for your time and your considerations.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think probably in the first agenda item, many of your comments can be addressed because we certainly consider all those things that you've mentioned. So staff, as you make your presentation, if you're able to address some of the things that were raised, that would be terrific. We will not be having a board discussion at this time on it because we're still on the public comment specific to things not on the agenda. Is there anyone else on the phone, on the call, who wishes to make a public comment? This is, again, your opportunity to do so for any item not onto this evening's agenda. I'm not seeing any other raised hands at this time, so we are going to go on to the next item on our agenda is the approval of our minutes from April 8th, 2020. Are there any changes, comments from the committee with regard to that? If not, do I have a motion to approve our
So
minutes?
moved.
Okay, we have a motion from Sue. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, second by Carlin. And so if we could please have a roll call vote on that.
Member
Actually,
Brown?
I'm sorry. Technically, I should ask if anyone in the audience wishes to comment. I've never had anyone comment on the minutes really, but in case you wish to, now's your chance. Not seen any. Go ahead, please.
Member Brown?
Yes.
Member Haskew?
Yes.
Member Mitchoff?
Yes.
Member Obringer?
Yes.
Member Perkins?
Yes.
I believe Member Ross is still absent. Is that correct?
Their city council meets on Wednesday night, so he may not be available.
Okay, thank you. Member Storer?
Yes.
Member Stepper? Yes.
Karen, you muted.
But we can
Yeah,
see you
being told
acknowledging.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Noack?
Yes.
Chair Anderson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Member Ross absent.
Okay, thank you so much.
You
At
need-
this, oh, excuse me, does someone have a comment? Okay,
There's an image behind me, so you can run in and out.
okay, and go ahead and mute yourselves, then we won't hear the back end of what's going on in your homes tonight. And so we do not have any items on the consent calendar, so we're gonna move right into our first item on our regular agenda calendar. And so we've got Tim and Darren are gonna provide a project update on the Innovate 680 and tell us, why didn't we widen on the other side of the road, Tim? What's ahead waiting for us?
The question from Mr. Bender is very, very timely for this agenda topic, and we want to go through the number of projects and provide an update on what we've been evaluating and looking at for the number of projects and suite of strategies for Innovate 680. But first, good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. My name's Tim Hale. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Projects at CCTA. And as you said, Darren and I will be giving you a detailed update of what the Innovate 680 program and project update. And so one of the things we do is part of the project development phase is we go through a series of studies that starts with evaluating alternatives. That's one of the first things that we do is we look at project development studies or planning studies that look at what are the needs, what are the challenges, what are the constraints, what are the opportunities that can address those challenges, and develop alternatives that try to meet all those needs and challenges in the corridor. And on 680, I think everyone realizes that 680 is a very challenging corridor. It's very constrained. It's got development up to adjacent to both sides. And in some cases, there is open land, and we certainly look for opportunities to take advantage of that. But there's also other challenges such as what's under the ground, such as drainage and retaining walls and underground infrastructure, as well as taking account cost of purchasing right of way or property for alternatives. And so one of the projects that we're currently developing is we call it the complete express lane completion project. And I'm going to share my screen and walk through a slideshow presentation. And oh, hold on a second, sorry.
That was close.
All right, so everyone can see my screen. Okay, so the express lane completion project, as you know, we've been really evaluating and studying express lanes in the 680 corridor for quite some time now. And right now in the southerly part of the corridor, as you know, from Red Gear to Acosta Boulevard, we have MTC is operating express lanes in the corridor, both in the northbound and southbound direction. Currently, CCTA, we're constructing express lanes in the southbound direction from the Benicia Martinez Bridge all the way down to Red Gear. And that'll actually complete the southbound direction and have a continuous 25-mile stretch of express lanes. And CCTA is always mindful of budget and schedule. And we actually negotiated a change order with the contractor to accelerate this project by 1 year, just to be able to bring benefit to public faster, but also to save time and money. And so that project will be converting the existing HOV lane in the southbound direction. And in that case, we did an environmental document, many studies, we evaluated many of alternatives, and happy to share that on our website and with anyone who would like to be interested in it. The project that we're really focused on as part of Innovate 680 is what we call the Express Lane Completion Project, and it's the I-680 northbound. And this particular stretch of freeway is very, very challenging. As you all are aware, we have a number of challenges at the 24 interchange, as well as at the 242 interchange, and then also at State Route 4. So this project looks at converting the existing HOV lane, as you've noted on the top right-hand corner of the screen, the solid purple. That's an existing HOV lane that will be converted to an express lane. And then the dashed purple line would close the 7.5-mile gap. The other really important thing that we do is evaluate as part of these projects is we look at where we have operational degradation in the corridor or challenges in the corridor. One particular example is the Lawrence Way and Treat Boulevard weaving area. And as everyone knows, there's unmetered traffic coming on from Lawrence Way, weaving into traffic, as well as people trying to weave off the freeway and get off the Treat. And that particular area really causes a bottleneck that trickles down all the way down into Danville, as well as the bottleneck at the 24 interchange. And so we go through a detailed traffic analysis, we identify these problem areas, and we also look for lane continuity. So for example, the 680 corridor is an interesting one because in order to stay on 680 freeway, once you pass 24, that all three of those lanes actually have to weave and merge over to stay on 680, or you would end up on 242, and that's called lane continuity. And so we have discontinuous lanes in this stretch of 680, which also causes weaving and congestion in this corridor. So we look at those areas and we try to develop alternatives to address those. And so we have been evaluating a number of alternatives. The first alternative is the close the gap alternative, and that looks at a number of design variations at the 24 interchange, which I'll cover in a minute. But also alternative 2 looks at reducing the gap. And so this is not necessarily a preferred alternative because we would like to close the gap, but part of the environmental process, we have to make sure we study a range of alternatives, making sure we're looking at the traffic analysis, the cost, the benefits that each of these alternatives bring based on the purpose and need and the performance metrics that we evaluate during the environmental document phase. And so we want to make sure we have a minimal type of alternative, and we also want to have an alternative, a maximum alternative, and study in between to find the best cost and benefit of all the alternatives. So the first alternative, 1A, was a reversible lane alternative. And we felt like this was cost effective because essentially what we would do is be borrowing the existing southbound express lane project once it's under construction, and we would be able to change that lane in different directions so we wouldn't have to widen to the outside. This alternative is very challenging because there is a number of design exceptions. There would be no shoulder in that lane, and you would also have ongoing long-term operational maintenance costs, such as Caldecott Tunnel, and also reversible barriers and lanes, such as on the Golden Gate Bridge. The other alternative that we looked at is alternative 1B, 1C, and I'll cover that in a minute. Alternative 2 looks at reducing the gap, extending the express lane from its current location in Rudgear all the way up to 24 in the northbound direction, and then bringing the HOV lane from 242 all the way down to North Main Street, basically leaving about a mile gap in the express lane, which would continue causing weaving. So people would have to weave across the 24 connector going northbound and then enter back into the express lane or HOV lane. But we would look at, again, a number of operational improvements along the corridor to help address those congestion in the corridor. So all of these alternatives basically range anywhere from $250 to $390 million. And so we look at, through a thorough traffic analysis, we determine what the benefits are from these alternatives, as well as evaluate the cost. So this is one of the most problematic areas in the corridor. This is actually looking south at southbound 680, and the structure above you is the BART structure that goes over 680 freeway. And you can see here that the number of physical constraints that we're dealing with in this bottleneck. And so there's really nowhere to widen other than to the outside, to the right, or to the west. This will be actually in the west direction on the westbound 24 side. And so we would essentially widen everything to your right, the right side of the picture here, because we do see open land, we do see available property here, and we see it. And there's also take advantage of an opening in a bridge, which I'll show in a minute. So this is alternative 1B, and 1B, what it does is it looks at removing the BART column in the corridor, which is at P11. So let me just kind of go back to that real quick. So you can see P11 here. That column is the problematic column. So this alternative basically removes that column and supports it with what we call an outrigger bent, and it's supported by two columns on the outside on the median or the inside of the freeway and the outside of the freeway. By doing that, it removes the column. It allows us to shift traffic to the right and then allow us to add another lane in the northbound direction, which does look like a contraflow lane or reversible lane, but this lane would allow people, this lane would actually weave underneath the 24 connector, go northbound, and it would bypass the 24 connector and stay continuous going in the northbound direction. This project, as we've been evaluating, has become very challenging. From the BART has new facility standards that basically just require no movement in the columns. And by evaluating this, we would have some movement in the columns, which would require retrofit of the foundations, which would not be cost effective. And so with this alternative, we are actually considering rejecting this alternative. The next alternative is 1C. This alternative is becoming more and more preferred because it basically takes the express lanes and puts it in the existing southbound roadway. And then it shifts over the southbound roadway where the existing 24 connector is, and then shifts the existing 24 connector over into this empty bay, which looking at the as-built was always planned to have traffic traveling within that bay under the bridge. And so this alternative is a little bit more expensive, but it also it closes the gap, and it minimizes the risk of the project, and it also meets the performance based analysis in terms of the traffic operations and other metrics of the program. And so this alternative, we're continuing to evaluate it as part of screening these alternatives. So what are we doing? We're continuing to screen the different alternatives, and we're trying to come up with the alternatives that we would initiate into the environmental studies. We're also, because of reduction in revenues and because of reduction in costs, and because some of these alternatives may be very expensive, we are also evaluating phasing options, again, to make these alternatives more cost effective, as well as provide the best benefit in terms of the alternative and the different, I'll say, components or features of that alternative, such as a collector distributor road system or improvements to address hotspots at Lawrence Way and Treat. By doing that, addressing that hotspot first might relieve a lot of congestion before doing these much larger alternatives. We're also doing ongoing coordination with BART and CHP. We're addressing some improvements to the truck scales at Treat Boulevard. And then, as I mentioned, we're coordinating with City of Walnut Creek and others on the Lawrence Way and Treat Boulevard weaving area to come up with the best cost-effective and least impactful alternative. We also are, you'll hear more about this later in the agenda, but we are also out doing public outreach with a 40-day online public scoping process because we are doing an environmental impact report for California Environmental Quality Act, which is called CEQA. The other alternative that we are evaluating is the part-time transit lane project. And this project provides a lot of transit reliability, accessibility, and attractiveness for transit in the corridor. And so as you all know, CCTA embarked on widening the freeway and constructing auxiliary lanes in the southerly part of the corridor in Danville and San Ramon. And by doing that, really, these auxiliary lanes are very beneficial to this project because when you run transit or transit vehicles in the outside shoulder, you are required to use the auxiliary lane wherever it's in place instead of using the shoulder. So really, we call this a part-time transit lane, or also known as bus on shoulder. But in this particular case, the buses, because we have these auxiliary lanes, the buses are actually operating only in probably about 2 to 3 miles of shoulder, which is shown in the northerly part of the diagram here, north of El Cerro to basically Rudmere. And so we're looking at both directions, both northbound and southbound direction. And this essentially what this does is it allows transit vehicles to operate in the outside shoulder, and we would provide all the necessary modified preferential signing to allow that. The buses would operate only when the general traffic to the adjacent lane is 35 miles an hour or less. So it would always be a max speed of 35 miles an hour. And we would only the buses will also only operate 15 miles an hour faster than the adjacent lane. The buses would all yield to enforcement and breakdowns in the shoulder and any safety concerns. And then when the buses get to the exit ramps and the on-ramps, the bus drivers would actually be trained in order to be able to make judgment of when to use the lane and how to yield the traffic when they get to conflict points like exit ramps and on-ramps. And we would also on the buses take advantage of technology and have advanced warning systems as well as lane keeping technology in the buses to be able to, for safety for the drivers, for the buses, and for the adjacent vehicles. So this particular project, we are still awaiting the statewide guidance from Caltrans on transit lanes. And what's interesting about this guidance is it's no longer saying that we need legislation to do bus on shoulder or part-time transit lane projects in California, which is actually very, very good news. The guidance is supposed to come out in July or August. And we've also developed a concept of operations. And this study looks at basically how the project or part-time transit lane would operate. And so we are developing that concept of operations and developing all the necessary preliminary engineering, and we're coordinating with CHP and Caltrans on this project. So a lot of progress has been made on this project. Another key component to Innovate 680 is first and last mile. So we have a Share Mobility Hubs project in which we really feel like Share Mobility Hubs is the gateway to seamless mobility. So as you continue to hear about mobility as a service and connection protection and seamless journeys, really Share Mobility Hubs really provides the mobility assets and the connections in order to provide those seamless journeys. And so this is a very project that would be great for eligibility for grant funding. It's all about share mobility and active transportation. And the other thing about these Share Mobility Hubs is we want them to be a community asset. We want it to be places to go, such as like the Pleasant Hill BART station where you have food trucks on Thursday. So these Share Mobility Hubs are supposed to be spread throughout the neighborhoods in a network to be able to provide at least a half-mile walkability to these Share Mobility Hubs, so people would not have to use their cars, and attract people to use other modes of transportation and active transportation, but also be a placemaking place where people would want to hang out. So one of the things we're doing is we're collecting data from our local agencies also transit providers. We're coordinating with our stakeholders through the concept of operations and technical advisory committee meetings that we've had. You'll hear more about that in the agenda. We're also doing something very interesting. We're doing the first ever, in my mind, a travel behavior study to help us inform how these projects should be developed. It really brings that humanistic flavor or perspective to all of these projects, and we're leveraging that travel behavior study to help inform us. And because of COVID-19, the pandemic, and because of the lack of ridership, and maybe the anxiety around using shared mobility, we want to wait for input from the travel behavior study to better inform how we might develop this project. Mobility as a service, you've heard a lot about this. TDM strategies is very, very important to Innovate 680, and this really provides the platform from that, really accessing the overall transportation system, personalizing mobility, providing incentives. And so through this platform, the traveler would enter the origin and destination on a mobile application, pick the mobility options that meet their needs, their personal needs. They would schedule, pay, track, and receive rewards, for their journey. And so for this particular project, we have started developing all the necessary documentation for FHWA project management plans, as well as a concept of operations, as well as a system engineering management plan to submit into FHWA to be compliant with the grant. The grant, we actually executed this agreement with FHWA back in February of this year, and we started work on some of the on milestones. This particular project will actually have a formal program or project evaluation plan that's going to be independently studied and evaluated by UC Berkeley. And they'll have a set of key performance indicators that will be evaluated as part of this project because it is a Federal Highway Administration grant. The other project we have is the Automated Driving System Demonstration Grant. And really the key here is really advancing the safety standards, developing rulemaking, enhancing mobility for the underserved and transportation challenge, all using level 3 or above automated technologies. And so there's 5 levels of automated technologies. Level 1 is essentially your basic cruise control in the vehicle. Level 2 would be your some of the technology you might have in your vehicle today in terms of blind spot, notification, lane keeping. And then level 3 starts getting into more, the car can actually be automated enough to drive itself, but with the driver still in the vehicle. So you've heard about the Tesla where a driver sits there with his hands hovering across the vehicle. That's level 3. Level 4 is an autonomous vehicle that has no steering wheel, no brake pedal, no gas pedal, and requires some sort of remote or emergency remote operation for that vehicle. And level 5 is full autonomous. And so for this grant, we were required to use level 3 or above automated technologies for this grant. We have 3 projects with this grant. We're looking at developing a circular on-demand shuttle service within Rossmore using level 4 shared autonomous vehicles provided by Local Motors. They are a domestically manufactured vehicle. And the key here is increasing transit accessibility to the elderly community, as well as providing and developing safety performance standards for this project. The second project is developing on-demand shuttle services in Martinez to the County Veterans Memorial Hospital, providing that accessible transportation using innovative technologies like self-docking wheelchair equipment, and making sure that we decrease and provide accessible transportation for people trying to get to their appointments. Over time, the absentees for appointments in the hospitals have been increasing drastically. So we actually have partnered with the county hospital to get information to be able to provide this service to people for appointments, but also for emergency services. And then the next project is personal mobility on 680. So one of the strategies at 680 is to prepare the corridor for the future. And this is one of the strategies. This is to help, this project is from El Costa to Croat Canyon on I-680 and really provides the infrastructure such as cellular 5G and dedicated short-range communication to provide the infrastructure to be able to do real-time communications between the vehicles and infrastructure and between vehicles and collect that data so we can use that data to be able to better understand the transportation system and what's happening in the 680 corridor with these new technologies. So on the automated driving system, we are coordinating with FTA, Federal Transport Administration, who's administering this grant on the award agreement. We've been finalizing the scope and budget with our partners, such as Verizon, Amazon Web Services, and other car manufacturers, et cetera. And we've been planning for a notice to proceed and take that agreement to the board in fall of this year. So the next project is the Advanced Technology Project, and I'm going to hand it over to Darren Henderson with WSP, who's our consultant corridor manager, to cover this project and then the remaining slides.
Thanks, Tim. Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. Yeah, so one of the responsibilities that we have at WSP as the corridor managers and the system managers for the program is the development of an advanced technologies project, looking at ways to use intelligent transportation system technologies to help improve the traffic operations on the I-680 corridor, and to also facilitate the integration of all of the different projects that Tim has spoken about, along with advanced technologies, so that they can work more seamlessly to resolve the issues that we're trying to address in this particular corridor. And so it has two aspects to it from our perspective. One is developing a program level concept to bring all of those together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. The other is to develop a specific project to apply advanced technologies to help improve traffic operations. And for that, we have been investigating a variety of different options to resolve some of the issues that we're seeing in the corridor. We've spent a considerable amount of time reviewing historical information, past reports, and also recently collected data, sort of pre-COVID collected data, to analyze exactly what's happening in the corridor, what's contributing to the problems that we see, and to try and identify where we have opportunities to use these technologies to resolve those issues. Now, Tim's talked a lot about the northbound express lanes completion project. That is to the north of the study area that we're looking at, and that is for the very reason that construction in that corridor would be problematic as a demonstration of advanced technologies. So we're looking to steer clear with our initial project. So we're looking at the section of northbound I-680 from the Alameda County line, El Costa, up to Olympic Boulevard, just before you get to the SR-24 interchange. So it incorporates 11 local interchanges that will be looking to use some technologies to help improve the flow in this particular corridor. So Tim, if you can advance the slide. So the concept that we're looking at right now is derived from a concept that was developed in Australia about 10 years ago. There it's called managed motorways. Here it's often referred to as managed freeways or smart freeways. And in particular, we're looking at the element of that that's known as coordinated adaptive ramp metering. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of ramp metering before and maybe quivering at the thought of us doing some form of ramp metering in the corridor. I can assure you that this is different from the type of ramp metering that you would be familiar with. It really is leveraging sort of state-of-the-art technologies to use the familiar tool of ramp metering, but to apply it in a more comprehensive and holistic manner so that we can resolve the issues, the traffic operational issues in the corridor more effectively. So it starts at a local control level. So each of the ramps will have its own local controller, which is not dissimilar from the way that ramp metering is currently done in other parts of the region. And that's illustrated by the blue shaded boxes that you see in the middle of that exhibit. And it takes information from the field, basically detectors at key locations along the corridor and the ramps themselves, and has a variety of different measures that it looks at to identify how ramp metering should be applied in order to control that particular ramp's operation. What makes coordinated adaptive ramp metering different is that it also has an overarching corridor-wide algorithm that's running at the same time, and that's illustrated by the gray box that encompasses those those blue boxes. And what that's doing is looking at the queue control or the queue lengths and the wait times on all of the individual ramps, and where it sees a particular location is having issues, it allows other ramps to then step in and to take some of the burden away so that there's more of an equitable allocation of delay along the entire corridor. And by doing that, we're able to better manage traffic flows in corridors to prevent congestion from occurring and basically getting more productivity over a longer period of time. So right now, Tim, if you want to advance to the next slide. we're undertaking a number of different analyses to look at the effectiveness of this. And that really starts with looking at the communications backbone within the corridor. These types of programs, these types of strategies are very data intensive. And so we're looking at the opportunities to use the existing fiber optic backbone that exists in the corridor to be able to get that level of control, that level of communication. And this is also very synergistic with the ADS project that Tim was just talking about, the automated driving systems. And part of that project overlaps with the area that we're looking at for this particular project. We're also coordinating very closely with FHWA and Caltrans, obviously both key stakeholders in the corridor. In terms of FHWA, it really starts with developing a project level concept of operations to really better define exactly what we're doing with our coordinated adaptive ramp metering in the corridor, but also developing a program level concept of operations that describes how that fits in the context of all of the other projects that Tim has already talked about. As you would expect, Caltrans, as the owner operator of 680, is a key stakeholder, and we've been working very closely with both the district and with headquarters to develop this strategy and to see how it fits within the context of work that Caltrans has ongoing in the corridor to develop its own ramp metering strategies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So right now we are in the midst of conducting a variety of different analysis, and we are preparing a memorandum that will summarize the findings of that analysis, looking at the existing conditions in the corridor, the needs in terms of what we're seeing in terms of levels of congestion and what's causing those and how they can potentially be resolved by these types of strategies. And ultimately we'll present those findings in a document that we will be sharing with the TAC and with yourselves at later meetings. And then finally, obviously we're dealing with 11 local service interchanges. These are locations, these are streets that affect your own communities. And so key to our process is, once we've developed that concept and we have something more tangible to share with you, we will be working or reaching out directly to each of the affected cities and looking to sit down with your technical staff and with yourselves to go over what we're recommending, what that means to your local cities, and how we would like to partner with you in order to ensure the ultimate success on these projects. So you can expect to see in the coming months some communications with your city staff to set up those meetings so that we can sit down with them one-on-one and go over exactly what's being recommended and how it will potentially impact and benefit your local communities. Tim, if you want to advance to the next slide. So I mentioned briefly that Caltrans is also developing a ramp metering project that is not just looking at installing ramp meters at various locations along the 680 corridor, but also several other freeway corridors in Contra Costa County and also in surrounding counties. In May, they received a significant SHOP grant from the California Transportation Commission to fund that effort. And it involves both the implementation of ramp metering, but also upgrading the existing fiber optics in these corridors and the potential development of a new traffic management system to manage all the data that's being developed. You can sense that there's a lot of overlap between that work and what we're proposing to do under the Advanced Technologies project. So we have been coordinating very closely with Caltrans, having focused meetings on what we are proposing to do, what they are proposing to do, and looking to build on the strengths of the respective teams to achieve the best outcome for the corridor. That effort will be ongoing. In fact, Tim has a meeting tomorrow with headquarters to talk about the potential project with the headquarters staff that would be involved. And that also is involving folks from District 4. So we will be continuing to have that collaboration and ultimately collectively developing a solution for this corridor. So our project work on the advanced technologies is just one part of the overall integrated team for Innovate 680. And you can actually see the advanced technology box down in the middle at the bottom of the exhibit there. So, that really represents that key component that I was just talking about. Tim has also talked about the other projects that you see listed along that same line. I wanted to also give you an update on some of the other aspects of the work that have been undertaken with the Innovate 680 program. And this is really focused on our role as the corridor managers and helping to support CCTA staff, your committee, other committees in delivering all of the different aspects of the program. And then also to give you a quick overview of the discipline teams, the list that you see down in the bottom left corner of the gray box. That are supporting all of the different project teams as they deliver their work in the 680 corridor. So Tim, if you could advance to the next slide. So we at WSP, in addition to our system management responsibilities, are also serving as the corridor manager for the project, and we are partnered with Graybo & Scott and ETC in that capacity. And that is really serving as an extension of CCTA staff to support them with the development of project controls, quality assurance, coordination for these outreach meetings, et cetera. And we've been working over the last year to set up all of those mechanisms. We now have all of those procedures established in place, and they are working very effectively to help facilitate the delivery of the individual projects that Tim talked about, as well as the work being done by the various discipline teams. In addition to our role as corridor managers, there are a number of other consultant firms that are working on different aspects of the work to support the overall program. And that includes the traffic modeling and operations, public engagement, systems management, environmental, and corridor-wide services. On the traffic modeling front, DKS is helping to support traffic data collection, analysis, and traffic forecasting needs on the various projects. Right now, a focus of the work is the development of travel demand forecasts to support the alternatives evaluation for the Express Lanes completion project, and that will be ongoing over the next few months in order to support that effort. Rebecca from Convey is going to talk a little bit more about public engagement later in the presentation, so I won't really get into that in any detail. We've already talked about the systems management work that we are conducting at WSP, although I will elaborate a little bit more on the program level work in just a moment. Environmental, GBS is doing environmental work, supporting, again, the necessary environmental approvals that are taking place under the program. Right now, the focus of their work is in reviewing the implications of SB 743 on our program. As you may all be aware, the SB 743 requirements have come into effect. So we expect that in the future, as we develop these projects, we'll be required to evaluate those projects based on the VMT impacts that they create. And so we have had the environmental team working on reviewing the Caltrans guidance that's being developed and assessing the implications to our program so that we can ultimately recommend and develop and implement strategies to help mitigate those requirements on future projects. And then there's a number of firms that are involved in delivering corridor-wide support services focused on things like engineering, right-of-way acquisitions, those types of services. There's a number of activities going on at the corridor level that are being supported by those teams. So I think you can get a sense that there's a lot of activity underway right now. To help us manage all of that, we've started with developing a series of goals to guide the overall program. This really helps us to focus on what's important in the corridor, what are the considerations that we should be making as we look at projects and try to determine the most effective projects. I'm not going to read this. I believe they've been shared with you previously, but these represent the goals that were identified after extensive stakeholder communication. This involved multiple iterations of review with all of the various committees involved in the program to come up with this set of goals that represent collectively what we're trying to achieve with the Innovate 680 program. Tim? So this really is to guide how we analyze projects, how we evaluate the effectiveness of projects, and how that works at a program level. So we will be assessing the effectiveness of the overall program. And then these goals will then also filter down at the project level to provide guidance in terms of the effectiveness of individual projects. So to do that, we've developed this matrix that arrays how each of the individual goals are expected to relate to the various projects that are ongoing. And you can see in some cases, goals apply to all of the projects, and in some cases, they're more selective based on the particular mode that's being served. This then helped us to narrow down to a range of measures that would facilitate assessing those particular goals for the specific projects. And then that then allowed us to further refine this extensive list of measures into a more refined list of measures that will represent the program level metrics that we'll be assessing at the end of the Innovate 680 program to determine exactly how effective we've been. So again, the whole purpose of this is that it provides a framework for guiding how we develop the program, to assess the individual projects and how effective that they will be in delivering those goals, but also then to, at the end of the delivery of those projects, assess how effective we've been at a program level in terms of accomplishing the desired outcomes for Innovate 680. So I think between Tim and myself, we've engulfed you with a fire hose of information. I expected that was a lot to take in a short period of time. So certainly we would invite any questions that you may have regarding exactly what's going on with the program and the progress that we've been making.
Well, first of all, I want to say you've been very busy. That is a wealth of information, and it's really exciting for those of us who have been working on this traffic issue on 680 for so many years to see some really positive, potential, realistic alternatives that may come forward. So let's start out first with members of this commission who might have questions. And so because you're participants, you can't raise your virtual hand apparently, so you have to just raise your real hand. I'm going to find you. And then once we get through that, I will give the opportunity for members of the public who are on this call who also have questions they'd like to ask. So, okay, I see Sue. Let's start with Sue.
Unmute myself first. Just a question on the metering with Caltrans getting the large grant. How do you coordinate who pays for what in that kind of situation, that kind of big project?
So that's an excellent question, Member Nowak, and that's actually exactly what we're trying to work out right now, is really the scope between the two projects and the cost share of the two projects as well, because Caltrans really, they've got this large funding opportunity for this project. And so obviously we certainly want to work together, partner together, and take advantage of that and actually deliver the right set of the right project, to the public. And so that's one of the things we're going to be working out over the next several months. We're going to be having meetings and working out and align the scope and responsibilities and develop the cost, and then what the cost share might be between the two agencies.
And will the systems be similar if Caltrans is looking at this on a much broader scope? And the systems that we're looking at in our area, will those systems be compatible, or will we have some difficulty in assessing which is the right system to use?
So this would be a pilot project, so along this corridor. And so if the pilot proves to be successful, which we are confident it will, then we would then potentially, Caltrans would potentially expand the system throughout the Bay Area, where appropriately. But the initial project will just be isolated to the 680 corridor. And to answer your question to the compatibility, yes, it would be compatible with other Caltrans systems. And that's the intent of having Caltrans has an active traffic management system, and then Innovate 680 would be essentially a module that would be compatible with that system with Caltrans.
Okay, great, Sue, thank you so much. Other questions by commission or committee members? You are really an agreeable bunch. Norman, come on, Scott. The engineer in you isn't jumping out of his skin to ask a really important question.
I followed Tim's and Darren's programs, and I see how they kind of fit together. And I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more detail in the future that isn't easy to discuss in a meeting at this level.
No, absolutely. Okay, so if there are no other committee members who have questions or comments, I am going to go to anyone in the audience or staff members who happen to be here who have questions about this. And I'm not seeing any. I know Terry Ann is perusing the group too. Is there really no one who wishes to say anything?
I don't see anyone either.
Okay, well, that is great. Okay, so let's move on to our next agenda item, and the next regular agenda is going to be on, we're looking at an update, a funding update. So we've got some really great ideas, and then we have no money. But go ahead, Tim, and not to steal your thunder, but we have all these great ideas. If only we could pay for them. So please go ahead.
So thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll be providing an Innovate 680 funding update. I'm going to share my screen. So Innovate 680 is over a $600 million program. And as we continue to add strategies and projects and alternatives and further define the scope of the projects, it's, I'm sure it's anticipated that costs will continue to go up. And so as we mentioned with the program goals and the metrics and the alternative evaluation, it's really important that we are picking the best strategies, the best projects, the best alternatives to really bring the best benefit into the corridor. And so we want to get these projects really ready to leverage federal, state, and regional fund sources to be able to compete. We feel like these projects are going to be very competitive in future grants. We're continuing to look for grant opportunities, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But however, as you all know, due to COVID-19, pandemic funding will be limited for the program, and it's really has caused us to really look at how we're kind of reevaluating the overall program. We're looking at the projects, we're looking at the strategies, and we're trying to determine really the right sequence of these different strategies and projects to really meet the goals of the program, but also be cost effective. And so, for example, we are considering, slowing down a few projects to allow us to evaluate them further and better understand the sequencing of these projects. And so one of those projects is the part-time transit lane project. And so we're awaiting, as I mentioned, we're awaiting the Caltrans guidance. And so we don't necessarily want to kind of spin our wheels. So we're waiting for the Caltrans guidance to come out before we can continue working with that project. Also, we want to better understand the ridership and the COVID-19 impact to transit and how that's going to impact that project and whether and when the right timing might be when the ridership will come back and to implement that project. We also want to learn more from the travel behavior study, as I mentioned before, to better inform the project and meet the needs of the users after the pandemic. And so you can almost look at the silver lining of the pandemic and say, let's develop the new vision of transit. And so what does that look like and how does that fit into this corridor? And similarly, we're slowing down the Share Mobility Hub project for similar reasons. People are going to be shifting away from share mobility to personal vehicles. And so we're also collecting data, the travel behavior study, to be able to inform and better shape that project for the future. And so we're also evaluating the sequencing of the projects to determine really the best time to implement to complement the other strategies and be cost effective as we look to seek grant funding. And so currently today, these are all of the fund sources on the Innovate 680 program, which totals about $179 million. However, the local Measure J TLC funding is at risk because of the due and the reduction in revenues, sales tax revenues for Measure J. But starting at the top, we have been successful to leverage $4 million of Measure J in exchange with MTC to come up with the $14 million of STP, which is fully funding the development work of the Northbound Express Lanes project. The $8 million grant from ATC and TD as well. These numbers are rounded. $7.5 million from FTA for the ADS grant. Those are the federal contributions to the overall program right now. On the state level, the SB1 LPP formulaic, that's the $2 million. So right now CCTA gets about $2.2 million every single year of LPP formulaic, and so we've allocated 1 year to Innovate 680. We plan to actually allocate other future years to Innovate 680 as well. The SHOP funding that Caltrans received, we are working with Caltrans to determine what the final amount or cost share would be of the project, and so that number is still kind of to be determined. But Right now, we have initially put about $90 million in there for the program. And then Regional Measure 3, we heard the good news last week. And so we're looking to start accessing the $10 million program amount for Innovate 680, I-680 transit improvements in Regional Measure 3, as well as an idea grant from MTC. So those are the regional funds. Measure J, we have $19 million in Measure J that was allocated to the program back when we did the 2019 strategic plan. That used to be 40 million, but because of the anticipated declining the economy back last year, and now it's even worse, we did anticipate a 19 million, that was usually 40 million, then was reduced to 19. We also have a number of in-kind contribution for our private partners for the ATC, MTD, ADS grants. So looking to the future, we are anticipating submitting a build grant as well as an info grant for federal monies as well. State funding, we've already been talking about with our regional partners about for a relatively large ask of funding, state funding through the SB1 programs for local partnership program, competitive, as well as solutions in congestion corridor. From a regional standpoint, and that's a total commitment of a little over $100 million from the state. From a regional perspective, we're looking for a regional contribution of their formulaic funds, as well as additional STP, and then also Regional Measure 3 Express Lane funding, and also a BAFA funding contribution, which is a little over $100 million for the program. Most of those funds are actually slotted for the Express Lane project, and so we are looking to phase the Express Lane project again to be able to fit within the anticipated regional funds that we've identified for that project. The local funding, this is future SB1 formulaic and STIP funds for the CCTA would be able to put on the project. And then, as you all know, Measure J did not pass in March. And so we do have an unfunded remaining amount of about $196 million in the program, which we'll continue to look for funding opportunities, either through some regional measure efforts or potentially another future measure to be determined late future by our board. So these are all the fund sources that we look like. And as you can know, this is very complicated, and we're constantly looking at this to be able to look for funding opportunities. But I think the good news here is that if you can look through all of these numbers, CCTA continues to be successful in leveraging Measure J funds to other regional, state, and federal funds at a 3-to-1 or greater ratio. And we continue to strive for that as we continue to deliver the program. So with that, that's a quick funding update, and I wanted to turn it over for any questions by the committee.
Okay, let's look at any committee members. Seeing anyone who wishes to talk about this? I am not seeing any committee members. You did a great job, Tim, identifying there is in fact some money there. We just are going to need a little bit more. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to our people in the audience. Anyone wishing to speak, this is your opportunity to do so. If you can raise your virtual hand or wave madly at Terry or myself, and we'll call upon you. And once again, I am not seeing anyone looking at this either. Okay, so we're going to then move on to our next item on the regular agenda, and that is going to be our Technical Advisory Committee Concept of Operations. So the TAC ConOps update. And so if
all right, Tim, you want me to just jump in?
Yeah. I guess I'd take over as vice chair. Tim, you're on.
I was wondering what happened to Madam Chair. So yeah, so yes, this is an update. So what we've done, and Darren kind of covered this initially in the program, but we've created a number of committees. We call it the governing body of Innovate 680. The Policy Advisory Committee is one committee, but we do also have a Technical Advisory Committee. But we also have a program leadership team. And so the Technical Advisory Committee consists of the 6 local jurisdictions along the corridor, the county, and as well as our transit operators in the corridor. So BART, LAFTA, and County Connection. So the program leadership team is formed of FHWA, CHP, and Caltrans. And so you take those 2 bodies and combine them, and you form what we call the TAC ConOp group, to basically go through and evaluate and develop how the entire Innovate 680 program is going to operate in this integrated, seamless fashion. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz. Liz loves system engineering, and so she's going to talk about what a ConOps is.
Thanks, Tim. So just a refresher, I believe Darren Henderson gave you guys this slide in your last meeting, but a refresher on what a concept of operations is. This is a document that, while it's required by federal highways and by Caltrans, it's actually one of the best tools we have in our toolbox to make sure that what we design as a system is what you guys and what the traveling public ultimately needs. So we take the goals and we take what the users needs and we put it together into this concept of operations. And we put it in a very user-friendly, readable document so that it's not the technical system requirements that are hard to digest and understand. It's really taking it from kind of a storytelling perspective of what this ultimately will look like for the end users. And then we can later translate that into a much more detailed technical requirements. So we are using the TAC to run through all the different pieces that are being documented in the concept of operations. So one of our tools in the toolbox to develop this concept of operations is going through user scenarios. And when you have a little bit more of a simple systems project, like just a ramp metering or just an express lane, it doesn't require this robust of a process, but we're trying to put all the systems together into a system of systems and make it work seamlessly for the traveling public. So to make sure that's happened, we're actually starting with the operational scenario. So Tim, if you go to the next slide. I'm going to demonstrate for you two of the different user perspectives that we have developed and how that actually translates into what we're doing in the systems and the architecture for Innovate 680. So I'm going to show you two different perspectives, and this is what we're envisioning a traveler can have as their experience once the Innovate 680 program is fully up and running. So the scenario starts with a commuter, and of course, they're going to make a smart decision. So they have an app that they load up in the morning, and it tells them all the different travel and cost options they have to get to work that day. They decide based upon what information is provided to them that they're going to take a bike, then a bus, and then transfer to BART. So they get on their way on their bike, and they get to a shared mobility hub. They're able to safely store their bike there and quickly get onto a commuter bus because they knew how long it was going to take them to get there, and their bus is there for them. The bus is going to then travel through city streets. They're going to take advantage of some nice timed signals and then ride on the on-ramp, where it decides to take the bus takes the HOV lane to quickly get onto the freeway. But because 680 is congested, the bus is going to take the part-time transit lane that's located on the shoulder, bypassing the regular congestion. The bus is going to then get over to BART for a perfectly timed transfer, and so that user is not having to sit and wait for the next BART train. And then they're going to get to their destination, walk to their office, and be notified that they have completed their trip, and this is how much their ultimate trip cost. So this sounds awesome, but this is what is required to make that happen. So what you're looking at is a system architecture diagram. And basically, this is telling us what systems need to talk to each other and what pieces of information need to flow between one another. So Tim, you can kind of advance a couple of these. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of the systems that need to talk. So in order for that bus to know that it was congested on the freeway and they should be taking the part-time transit lane, they're going to need information from Caltrans District 4 TMC. That TMC is going to require having information from the roadside equipment. The BART is going to have information that's passed along so that we can make sure that that timed transfer is happening between the bus and BART. So this is how we're using all these user perspectives to then figure out what systems need to talk to each other and what pieces of data need to go between each of these systems. So each one of these red boxes are components of the ITS architecture that are out there that are going to need to talk to make this, what seems very seamless and easy to the user, actually happen in real life. I'm going to walk through one more scenario. So this is our SAV. So we have a rider in the morning and they are going to their local shopping center. They go through the same process of opening up their app and having multiple options provided to them. They decide that they're going to take a shared autonomous vehicle. They hail that the shared autonomous vehicle picks them up at their home and then takes them along their journey to a shared mobility hub. At that shared mobility hub, they're carpooling. We did this pre-COVID. So they pick up some extra passengers at the shared mobility hub. The SAV travels along some local roads. It's nicely timed. They're able to get to their destination as expected. They're dropped off and their journey is kind of wrapped up in a nice summary in their app. So this is all the systems that would need to talk to one another in order to make that journey happen so seamlessly. So in this scenario, you see all the yellow on the left. These are all the highway pieces of ITS that we don't need for this, but we're going to have all of the ITS on the local roads, all of the transit sharing information to make sure that end user has all of their information at the beginning of their journey and that the systems work to make that journey as seamless as possible. So this is just two examples of how we are developing the concept of operations, really taking it from this ultimate vision and then making sure that we can make that into reality based upon all the systems that need to come together to make that happen. And I think at this point, I am going to pass the baton to Danielle.
Thanks, Liz. So this is Danielle Stanislas with Emergent Transportation Concepts. I'm your stakeholder engagement manager for Innovate 680, as well as a part of the system management team with Liz. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about the process, particularly the collaborative process that we've been undertaking with many of your staff to come up with this program ConOps and to further flesh out the details of the projects, because as we know, the devil is in the details. So next slide, Tim. So this is a quick summary for you all, a quick shout out to all the folks on the line that are our technical advisory committee members from your jurisdictions, and to all of our program leadership team members that are on the call today, because their assistance and participation in this process has been instrumental towards fleshing out the issues and the topics that we need to tackle in order to effectively and efficiently deliver this Innovate 680 program. So what you see on the screen is a quick summary of the 4 workshops that we've held to date. We've been methodically stepping through them approximately monthly up to this point to do enough of a broad brush overview, lay of the land of what we're talking about when we talk about the Innovate 680 program, what that means for certain projects, and how that starts to fit together. So we did the first couple that had to talk about the overall program structure like we presented to you all at your first PAC meeting, but then we moved into some further specificity in terms of diving more deeply into what we defined as the Advanced Technologies Project that Darren was mentioning earlier today, both from a freeway standpoint, but also from a local road standpoint. And then we also started to dip our toes into a conversation about transit along the 680 corridor, particularly with an eye towards that high capacity transit, major trunk line service. And so what you see on the screen is a few major takeaways from this conversation. There's much more detail that we are tracking in a very detailed issue matrix, but a few major things to highlight for you all that we think are relevant to you all as PAC members is that we have teed up the conversation with your TAC members around shared control for this managed motorway system. We know that O&M is a big issue. We understand that standard operating procedures need to be discussed to particularly minimize the operational impacts to the local streets and to give some more clarity and detail to how this would all operate, not only under recurrent congestion, but under non-recurrent congestion when there are major incidents or even larger scale emergencies. So that conversation has started, but there's going to be more meat put on the bones as we move forward with future TAC meetings. Similarly, there's been a discussion with the TAC members about the feasibility and openness to certain types of arterial management strategies, including things like transit signal priority. We've heard loud and clear from your TAC members that all of this is on the table, but again, devil's in the details. There are limitations on existing infrastructure, both on the local agency and the state side, as well as with the transit providers, and we're going to need to take that into account. Finally, as Liz alluded to, the communications and data transfers, those communications components that enable what Liz was just describing are so critical here. That's a lot of data transfer. That's a lot of sharing of information, data sharing protocols, security protocols, all of that. And we're going to navigate through those conversations in close consultation with you all and with our partner agencies at Caltrans and the other PLT member agencies. And finally, we're going to be talking more about the mode shift component. The next TAC meeting, in fact, is going to be addressing the second half of that conversation about transit, and particularly with an eye towards first and last mile, including discussion of barriers, opportunities, constraints, and along with that, the equity conversation will come into the fold. So next slide, Tim. So this is a quick rundown of, again, what we've covered so far, but also what I was just mentioning about the next TAC ConOps working group meeting, which is currently slated for July 20th, where we will be teeing up that first mile, last mile conversation, digging more deeply on that mobility on demand, mobility as a service project, and having some conversation about equity, accessibility, and inclusivity, because as you saw from the program metrics slides that Darren covered, one of our very explicit goals for Innovate 680 does indeed have to do with equity. And it always has, even outside of the particular sensitivity and relevance right now. So we also have up on deck some possible remaining topics. I won't read them all here, but you can see that some of the high priority things I've already touched on, such as how everything performs together, O&M, and overall communications and data integration. So we have an eye towards particularly how we tee up those conversations with the TAC, and then we will correspondingly bring back those policy related items to you all at future TAC meetings. So with that, I believe I will now be turning it over to Rebecca from Convey, who's going to take us through some of the other more innovative data sources that we've been looking at as we move forward with the Innovate 680 program development of the ConOps.
Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, hi again, everyone. My name is Rebecca, and I'm with a company called Convey, and we are the public outreach lead on the Innovate 680 program. So Tim, you can advance the slide, I think. So as it's been mentioned a couple times during the presentation, we have been working with a behavior science consultant to do some research on this program. And that consultant is named Root Solutions. They're an Oakland-based company. And so they are conducting a study that is going to help inform the Innovate 680 program development. They will also inform how we as an outreach team will communicate to the public about these innovative projects. Their work includes a few key deliverables, the first being some landscape analysis reports. They are preparing one of these reports for each of the 6 projects. Then we're going to move into behavior drivers analysis. And that's going to include some user analysis studies, including a survey, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. And then finally, the end result will be some intervention recommendations, which will helpfully guide us in how we can effectively change behavior and maximize the mode shift in this program. Okay, so next slide. So I wanted to share just a little bit about what a landscape analysis report is. I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about this already, but it's a really important process for behavior science studies because it basically takes any available research in the nation or the world about a transportation topic, and it synthesizes that into a comprehensive report. And this is really helpful for us as a team because it does some of that legwork that's very helpful in helping us guide any additional research that needs to happen. So for example, we might find out that there's some well-established findings and no more research needs to be done. We can implement those things right away. But it also might show us that there's gaps in research, and that's where we will be conducting some primary research of our own through surveys or other means. Okay, next slide. So here's just a few upcoming milestones. There's a lot more that's going to happen with Root Solutions, but I just wanted to share what's kind of happening right now and in the near future. So first of all, as I mentioned, the landscape analysis work is already underway. And so far we've completed reports for 3 of the 6 projects, the Shared Mobility Hubs project, the MOS project, and the part-time transit lanes project. Next, we're expecting the express lanes completion report, as well as a special report that Route Solutions is going to do for us about mode shift. And so that will encompass a lot of first mile, last mile discussion, as well as MOD, MOS, and shared mobility hubs, and kind of give us a broader look at just mode shift as a feature. And then, as we mentioned a couple times, there will be a user analysis survey that we're hoping to release as early as September of this year. Okay, next. Okay, now we're going to jump into the fun stuff. So this, what I've prepared here are just a few highlights from the analysis reports that are complete. And we're going to start with the Shared Mobility Hubs project. And with this project, the national research showed that in general, people are willing to walk 5 to 10 minutes to transit, which is about a quarter mile or a half mile. In the Tri-Valley area, only about 2% of people walk to transit. People will bike up to 5 miles, with most of or about half of those trips being taken or are 2 miles or less. 75% of e-bike users or scooter trips are shorter than 2.5 miles. And if people live more than 5 miles away from a hub, they're more likely to drive. So this kind of data is really interesting for us. And I think Tim mentioned it earlier in his presentation, that we're going to be sensitive about where the shared mobility hubs are located based on data like this. Okay, next slide. The Mobility as a Service project report was actually really interesting as well. We learned that 70% of Contra Costa residents commute alone via car, that 86% of residents have 2 cars or more per household, and that basically the transit infrastructure in Contra Costa was built around a very driver-centric culture, which is less true, for example, in European cities, where actually just over 50% of families have daily access to a car. So one of the things we're going to have to work on here is identifying barriers and motivators for some of our key audiences, which of course would be, regular drivers, but also those pre-drivers, like people who don't yet have their license or maybe don't own a car yet. So this will be a fun one, and I think we have our work cut out for us. Next slide. The part-time transit lanes report taught us that actually evidence of what motivates people to take buses that can go in a part-time transit lane is quite lacking. So we'll be doing some primary research of our own to get some feedback from the community about what might motivate them to use that mode of travel. And with that, though, we also learned that it's really important to emphasize the benefits of transit, especially now when maybe transit ridership is low. Also just normalizing bus riding and focusing on the cleanliness and the safety of this mode of travel. And I believe, Tim, that brings us to the Q&A slide. So if there's any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And I'm going to, thank you for not sharing that. I can look a little bit better. Do we have any questions? I am not seeing any from any of our committee members. Once again, is there anyone from the public who has any questions about what was just presented? Okay, again, another really informative presentation. I appreciate the concise nature of these presentations that are just packed with a lot of great data, great details. Okay, so let's go on and to our next regular agenda item, and that is going to be provided by Lindsay and Rebecca to talk about public engagement. And I saw earlier on 2 presentations before, we're starting to bring in that public engagement. So tell us more about it and how we're pushing that out through all of our different agencies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't realize I was up again so soon.
Well, here you are. We're moving right on.
So again, Rebecca from Convey. I would just like to give you all an update on what's been happening with the public engagement. I'm going to start with some program level updates, and then I'll move into some project specific updates. So Tim, you can go ahead and advance the slide. So one of the first things that we prepared, and it went live several months ago, was our program website. And what you're seeing here is just a screenshot really of the homepage of the website, as well as an example of one of the 6 project pages. And I was intentional about the project page that I would show here because right now in the Express Lane Completion Project, as others have mentioned during this meeting, our virtual public meeting for the scoping phase of work is now open and live and ready for comment. So you can see the kind of green banner across the top of these pages is actually something people can click to go directly to the scoping website and provide comments on the information provided there. So just very quickly, the homepage is going to host a lot of very general information, but also it has big round buttons with some of those project branded identifiers that you've been seeing throughout the presentation. And those buttons link people to the project pages very easily. And next page. And this is simply just an example of what the pages look like without a big green call to action banner across the top. So this is sort of the standard look for the website. And the URL is ccta.net/innovate680. Okay, next slide. We also have, crossing the finish line very soon, a program brochure. This is one of those very public-friendly pieces that we wanted to put together that give a nice overview of the Innovate 680 program, as well as some general information about each of the 6 projects, explaining a little bit how they are all connected. So this will also be available on the Innovate 680 website on the homepage. And I believe at the last PAC meeting, we might have featured our program video. And this is a complementary piece to that video. So those are 2 very, like I said, public-friendly pieces that we're hoping the public will enjoy. Next slide. Wrapping up this week is our first newsletter about the program. We're intending to do these newsletters quarterly. This happens to be pictures of what the summer newsletter looks like at the moment. This will provide, just as it states, some news about the projects and also some highlights about where the program is and any specific fun facts that we think the public might enjoy. And finally, with regard to outreach, we wanted to work really hard to have all public-facing materials follow some standards. So the items you're seeing here are a graphic style guide and a content style guide. These are not necessarily public-facing documents, but we do use these to make sure that the public-facing documents follow a similar voice, aesthetic, and tone. And so these are helpful tools for the project team. And likewise, on the next slide, we've also created program templates for the same reason, to give public-facing material, give the program team some guidelines for what public-facing materials should look like. And moving on to the project level updates, we are doing some project fact sheets for each of the projects, and those are all underway, some of which are completed and will be hosted on the website. And next. And here is the Express Lane Completion online scoping meeting page. As I mentioned, the site was launched on June 15th, and the comment period is open until 5 p.m. on July 29th. The site is fully accessible, and we've created that with our partner HDR. And next slide. A couple highlights coming up. Again, the release of the summer newsletter will happen very soon. We have our behavior science survey happening sometime in the fall of 2020. And then we're expecting the release of the draft environmental document for the Express Lane Completion Project in early 2021. And that brings me to the end.
Okay, once again, are there any questions? Yes, go ahead, Sue, please.
Oh, seem to be the only one doing questions today. So with this public engagement during COVID-19, I'm assuming a lot of the input you're going to get is going to be driven off our current situation, while the projects we're working on are very long term. So how do we take that information and make sure it's not sort of knee-jerk reactions to COVID-19 versus long-term transportation factors?
That's a really excellent question, and we do talk about that a lot. I don't know, Tim, if you want to interject as well, but I'll just say that Lindsay and I are taking it really just like a day at a time, a week at a time, and then a comment at a time. So when we get comments that seem to be sort of that knee-jerk reaction, we, I guess, we must remind ourselves that really traffic is eventually going to go back to what it was. You know, for example, traffic's pretty low right now. There's not as much congestion as there was, but I don't think it's been so long that people have forgotten what congestion is like. So we do have to take that into consideration, certainly. And with the behavior science study, we're actually learning that COVID-19 has, if anything, prompted people to change their ways a little bit, right? And so people are driving less, working from home, but they're also more likely to shift their behavior because they're doing it right now. So that's actually a great opportunity for us to do something like Innovate 680 and try to get people to further change their behavior and maybe permanently mode shift.
Yeah, and if I can just add, like, I think the part-time transit lane project is a really good example, because we know that transit ridership is eventually going to come back, but it's probably going to come back in a different way. And so we want to leverage what we're learning in the travel behavior study to basically essentially enhance the project, you know, not necessarily stop the project, but basically enhance the project. And I would say the same thing for the Shared Mobility Hub. I think people are going to continue in the future to need first and last mile needs. Are going to need people are going to continue to rely on shared mobility in the long term. And so again, we just have to figure out ways to enhance, based on what we know today, those first and last mile options, those shared mobility options, and not necessarily, I don't think really necessarily change the projects too much, but I think more enhance them is probably the right way of thinking about it.
Is there an opportunity to actually get people to rethink the way they do transportation under these circumstances, so that when we come out of it, they start in a changed mode versus going back to the old ways? You know, that's
the part-time transit lane project. So make transit into what we think the future of transit will be, right? And when we implement the project, that's exactly.
And when it's safe to get back on transit in a normal fashion. I guess that's the other challenge, obviously, and post-COVID, because currently there's such a fear of transit. So as we sort of try to design the use of it, we have to plan for non-COVID, obviously. Okay, other comments by any committee members? Karen, please go ahead. And Karen Stepper. I've got two Karens here.
I just wanted to see how we're tracking, in fact, what is happening in COVID, because this could go on several years in terms of the decrease and the change of where companies are locating, et cetera. So I'm concerned about turning it into dollars, so that if we look at this then 20 years down the road and there's another pandemic, how do we effectuate how much the decrease in revenue is going to be? So how are we tracking that?
The tracking the impact by month in terms of the revenues and so forth. Uh-oh. I think we lost her.
Oh dear, that happens. I think, Karen, you froze on us. Okay.
So I think the question was related to, you know, how are we going to track and optimize or monitor the transportation system as we kind of come out and maybe when another pandemic or another impact. So that really gets into the mobility as a service, and also having a really data rich program. And so, you know, being able to provide you know, the necessary data to be able to analyze and understand what's happening in the transportation system, optimize the transportation system, do better transportation planning. And so I think in the future, we're getting more into what we like to call data-driven mobility. And I think that's really apparent in the Innovate 680 program is data-driven mobility.
Okay, great. Thank you. And if when Karen returns, if there's anything else she has to ask, we'll give her that opportunity. Any other questions by committee members? Okay, I'm going to open it up to those who are also participating on this call who are not on the committee. Are there any questions? I'm not seeing any virtual or live raised hands at this point. Okay, then I think what we'll do, and if maybe Stepper returns, we'll let her finish her comment. We're going to move on then. Oh, there she is. Okay, Karen, welcome back. And let's unmute you. You're muted, Karen. Are you able to unmute yourself? Try again. You're still, we can't hear you. And
She dropped off a couple of times, so.
Yeah, Terry Ann, you can make her a co-host.
She is.
Okay.
For some reason, I can't unmute her right now.
That may be, okay, we'll say never mind. Well, why don't you just repeat briefly what you had just said, Tim,
well,
just so Karen can hear.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of your question, Member Stepper, is, this is a very data-rich program. And I think using tools like Mobility as a Service, the Mobility on Demand app, but also being able to, looking at the system engineering, will be able to collect data off the corridor and be able to provide it in a way where we can monitor the traffic transportation system. We can look for opportunities to optimize the transportation. This is not a program where we deliver it and we don't continue to monitor. The key to this program is to monitor everything that's happening with the program so we can shift and adjust as the program is being implemented. And so the ability to have data to be able to understand how to shift these strategies, using technology like this, we should be able to shift the strategy. So for example, if we see ridership down in one corridor, then we might need to shift the strategy or other types like transportation demand strategies and so forth to a certain part of the program or different corridors to increase ridership. And so we're going to be constantly monitoring that through a data management center and dashboard. That's the future ultimate vision for Innovate 680. But we also obviously have to start somewhere and start developing, implementing these immediate projects and needs. But the goal is to have some sort of data management center to be able to monitor and optimize the transportation system as we go through situations like COVID-19.
Okay, and hopefully Karen, did that sort of respond to your question? You can just nod. Oh, but she's gone. Okay.
Oh, I was just able to unmute her too.
Oh, okay. Well, technology is great when it works. Okay, any other comments on this particular item? Okay, we are then going to move on at this point. And so next regular agenda calendar is going to be provided by Danielle, and PAC members provide additional feedback, comments for future agenda items. I mean, personally, I just want an update on what you presented tonight. I think it's very helpful, the direction we're continuing to go, and particularly as you fine tune the northbound 680, it sounds like you've got a good option right now. I'd love to stay updated on that because that is a very common question, particularly as we get ready to open our southbound HOV lanes, being able to talk about what we're going to be doing for the northbound where there's so much traffic. Other members, things you'd like to see on this agenda? We do meet quarterly, so you've got a few months between meetings.
I just was going to suggest, I loved, the renderings of the HOV lanes that you did for the different examples. And that was really helpful to me. And if you could do some of that on some of the other points, I have a hard time doing some of those little charts and understanding them. So that visual was really good. More of those would be helpful. And then I need my decoding ring for all your acronyms, because I thought being on all these things for 5 years, I know most of them, but I still don't. So.
They still surprise you. Absolutely.
There's a handful I still don't know.
Yeah. Well, and also if with the public outreach, I'm assuming we're pushing that out through a lot of different venues. But if you want to push it out to us one more time as committee members, we can certainly work with our cities, our counties to continue to get that information out so that people can participate.
Madam Chair, if I could just ask a few questions real quick. So
Sure.
in terms of the additional feedback, the first meeting we had was primarily just an introduction to Innovate 680, and this presentation was really to provide some really meat to the bone and really give you an overview of all the things we're looking at, the details, the projects, and so this is really your opportunity to kind of hone in on certain aspects of the program and tell us what you would like to see more of in terms of a topic or a particular area. Like Member Perkins, if there's a particular area that you're really interested in, we can bring that back to the PAC. Or if you want to hear more about details about a particular thing, we can bring that back to the PAC. And so we can certainly talk about it now, or you're welcome to send us an email or send me an email to ask for different agenda topics in the future. But we really wanted to provide a really broad brush overview of all the detailed things that are going on, so you can tell us what you want to learn more about in the Innovate 680 program. And I think the visual simulation comment was very well taken. We'll continue to provide different type of interactive materials like that, and any other technical. And so really tell us what type of technical information you'd like to hear about, because this is really a policy advisory committee. And so eventually we're going to bring back some policy decisions as we move through that concept operation process and move through that system engineering process. We are going to bring back some very technical policy decisions for this committee to make on behalf of the Innovate 680 program. And so we want to make sure you have the tools that you need in order to make those decisions in the future.
Right, and I'm personally interested in definitely our alternative travel lanes, are formerly known as bus on shoulder. What are we calling them now? It's something.
Part-time transit.
Okay, yeah. So I'm very interested in that, but then how that coordinates, of course, with the metering lights, which are not the traditional metering lights, which I know a lot of cities in my end of the county have been very concerned about over the years. So I think it sounds like you're doing outreach specific to each city with those. I want to understand any concerns those cities might have, and if we're able to allay those concerns, so we're not going to be backing traffic up, onto their already busy city streets, but at the same time, then being able to have buses, transit vehicles travel safely. I'm also, of course, very interested in our pilot projects right now in Rossmore and Martinez at the Vets Hospital, how those are working, and how we might be able to certainly expand those, if successful, into other communities where mobility is so challenging, and particularly where, for really people don't walk more than 2 minutes or bike or more than 5 miles, that we've got some work to do. So Sue, you had your hand up.
Yeah, the other thing that, to the extent you want public input and things like that, these projects are really broad and countywide. And I think for like people in Pleasant Hill that, you might want to talk about, say, this is what's going on, and get your support or put your feedback in. It would be good to sort of segment some of these projects and say, this is really going to alleviate these congestion points, and it's really going to help, here and here and here, where we think the hot spots are. Because I don't commute, so I don't really know where the hot spots are. I mean, plenty of people drive through Pleasant Hill to, cut out a lot of 680/24 stuff. But so being able to communicate that to the public in more specific language, like this is going to help here, this is going to help here, hopefully. Things like that would be really helpful in order to communicate to the public, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. Great input. Other thoughts? Other things you find intriguing about this, or anything you just absolutely hate and want to say, don't you dare ever think about doing that on 680? Carlin, was that a hand up, or was that?
It is.
Okay.
It is a hand. Yes. Yes. Thank you for calling on me. So something that Sue said kind of prompted a thought. So I'm just trying to figure out, we're having these conversations. This is not something that I think the public is paying close attention to during COVID. And I'm just wondering if there are ways that we can, if there are suggestions about how we can engage our individual communities to get some of that feedback, because I'm not sure, from a transportation perspective and a city council perspective, I'm kind of thinking about this, but there are thoughts that maybe, businesses might have in my community, or residents that might be, impacted since they live closer to the freeway. And so I'm just wondering if there are any suggestions about, or if there's information that we can share with the community that's kind of more bite-sized information so that we can get feedback and then bring that to future PAC meetings. So I'm just wondering if there are any suggestions about how I can go back and engage with folks in Concord, and then provide useful information to this body.
Yeah, I might have Lindsay kind of weigh in on this, or Rebecca weigh in on this, but I think a lot of the materials that we're developing relative to the the project fact sheets, the newsletter, the brochure for Innovate 680, those are obviously those are public facing materials that we want all of you to have and share with your constituents in your individual cities. And I think that each of these projects will actually go through an environmental process, and so there definitely will be project-specific public outreach as each of the projects continue to develop. So that's one thing to be aware of, and so that's one thing that we will be doing to give you an update. That was primarily one of the reasons of showing you those timelines from the public engagement outreach, is to show you these are the milestones, these are the times that we are going to be going out and engaging with your constituents, so you'll be aware of what's happening in your respective cities. So that way, if you do get questions, you know that we're reaching out because we're doing this behavioral study for user surveys, or reaching out to get initial scoping feedback for the northbound express lanes project. And so those are all opportunities that we'll be leveraging, not only to kind of market and engage the public about Innovate 680, but also to engage to their respective the individual projects as well. So I don't know if Lindsay or Rebecca, you want to add anything to that?
This is Lindsay. Hello, everyone. I do think that one of the things we can certainly work on to help aid that and make some more bite-sized nuggets would be for us to potentially share some periodic social media posts or other items that you as electeds can choose to post or share with your constituents in newsletters or your own social media accounts as you see relevant. That's certainly something that we have already started to do for this project in terms of posting about the ongoing virtual public open house. And we can certainly make sure that each of you has copies of information like that during relevant times to share with your constituents, or links back to the project with general information, if that would be helpful.
I love it. Lindsay, you read my mind, because any kind of graphics or little blurbs or things like that, unfortunately, our attention span is so short that we do need graphics for everything that we post, right? And links and things like that. And social media is a great way, I've seen through COVID, to communicate with people. And so I was kind of thinking along what you suggested. So thank you. That sounds great.
Can I just add, I think your comment about little blurbs and graphics is perfect. I think one of the issues I've had from folks in the past on the bond measure and things like that is there's so many words. And they won't read that. I mean, it's the same as get a memo and get your resume on one page. It's the same thing. Attention span's limited. You really got to hit them with a graphic and some quick blurbs and less verbiage, because I think you will lose the general public's attention. Those that are transportation nuts, you'll get them to read everything. But the general public, it's got to be more concise, bullet points, less words, more pictures.
Thank you. We will definitely keep that in mind as we move forward with developing materials.
Okay, great. Any other comments or questions about future agendas, things you want us to look at, things that particularly pique your interest? We're a simple group this evening. Either that, we're just really tired because it's been a long day. So I think, at our next meeting, if you have some sort of decision points where you want our advice, obviously, we're one component of this besides the whole authority, but by all means, to me, this was a very useful meeting, simply because you brought us up to speed on so many things you are working on. And so I found that very useful. Any other comments? What about anyone else on this call Anyone else wish to comment about things they would still like to see answered or brought forward on a future agenda? I am not seeing any.
Miss Member Perkins and
Oh,
Member
Scott.
Brown.
Okay, thank you for picking those people up. There we go. Okay, Scott, you go ahead, and then Carla, I'll have you go next.
The agenda item 1 was of particular interest to me, and I really appreciate you going through all the projects in sequence, all 5 of them. And so continue to do updates on those as to where they are. And I recognize that funding is going to be one of the key elements. So make sure we get that part of it as we try and implement some of these things in their entirety, and others will be implemented piecemeal. And that kind of progress and is very interesting and very helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. Carla, thank you.
Great. Yeah, let me make sure I'm on. Sorry. Oh, good. Not muted. Not muted. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Candace. So when we look at distribution of materials that might come from this group, I want to make sure, if I'm not already a member of the Facebook page, if there is one for I-680 PAC, because that way I can watch as soon as it hits my in-basket, I can distribute it. Because what tends to happen with Facebook is so much material comes through every single day that if it's not one of those very close friends, or it's some sort of tied directly to a topic that I'm very interested in, I lose it. And if I don't log in for a day or two, it's gone. So I want to make sure, is there a Facebook page for this so that as soon as it hits my in-basket, I can distribute it?
This is Lindsay Willis with CCTA. At this point in time, all of the materials and information are being distributed from the Contra Costa Transportation Authority's social media accounts and email addresses. I anticipate that as we start to create materials for each of you to share with your constituents, we will probably email those to the PAC in its entirety so that you have them, or perhaps even post them on the website so that they can be downloaded by you and other interested folks who want to share them. We have not created a specific Facebook page for the PAC because it is a public committee, and we want to be sure that everyone who wants to be involved in this process can be. So at this point in time, all of the information for this project is being distributed through CCTA.
So that's terrific, and I understand the fact that this is a public meeting, even if there's information after the meeting, so that we can make sure that distribution happens. The other thing I'd like to see in future meetings is a little bit more about how, since I'm representing Wheels Bus, which is primarily in Pleasanton, Dublin, and Livermore, but we do run up the I-680 corridor for one of our transit routes. Is to, since I'm representing Wheels, to make sure that whether it's bus on the shoulder or this dedicated lane on the side, that we continue to highlight that, what bus routes specifically benefit from and how I can carry that information back to my organization. So those are my 2 things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, other comments? Okay, and Tarian, do you see anyone in the audience? I'm not seeing anyone on my.
No, I do not.
Okay, terrific. Well, then that, we do not this evening have any correspondence or communications. And so does anyone have anything else? This is sort of your last chance to speak, forever hold your peace. Okay, then we are going to adjourn to our next regular meeting that is not going to take place until October 14th. At 6 p.m. And so we are adjourning this meeting at 7:48. Thank you all for your attention, for your participation, and really to the authority staff, I really appreciate all you've accomplished so far. It's been fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.